Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic. Let's do it. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen in your life that you cannot explain? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Around 2003, I was walking home from work in the afternoon and just happened to look up on an overcast day. Parallel to my direction, a meteor burned up, led by a bright burning and leaving black smoke across the whole sky. It made a low-pitched, loud rumbling across the whole sky for 3 seconds it took to travel that far. Before YouTube, no one would have believed me, much less heard anyone who saw it. In hindsight, it was wicked cool to see. At the time, I thought I was going to die. I had seen a meteor shower. I had never seen one that low or with any volume. I worked in a nursing home for years during the night, and everyone always complained of weird stuff like noises on the top floor. I never believed in any of that, so I was always the one going upstairs to do night checks. One night, I was changing a resident on that floor with a colleague, and my colleague complained he heard something like people waking or walking. We were in the resident room, and I had to go to the cupboard at the end of the corridor to get bed sheets, and when I was coming back with the bed sheet, I kept hearing steps, like if someone was touching and opening plastic bags. I was so annoyed and looked outside the room and saw a shadow passing the corridor. The issue is that the shadow's so big, like if literally a person just passed by along with steps, noises, and plastic bags. I freaked out so badly and froze completely. I had to call another colleague to come upstairs because I was so scared of coming out of the resident's room. Bear in mind that I do not believe in those things, and for 2 years I was coming out of the resident room, always the one doing the night checks on the top floor and bottom floor on my own. Never had any problem, and never saw something. Since that day, I never went upstairs alone, and was always very scared. My grandfather had just died a few days earlier, and my mom was crying one night in our kitchen. I started hugging her. We had a lot of my grandfather's belongings, but there was this broken radio that didn't even have working batteries in it on the table, along with other things like photos and clothes he previously owned. This is the only unexplainable thing that I've ever experienced. But while my mom was bawling and crying, the radio made a very loud static noise for about a second. We both stared in silence at it. It was eerie. She stopped crying because even she heard it. We both just went to bed after that and haven't spoken of it since. I'd imagined if it was something paranormal, it was my grandfather letting us know he's here, but who knows. Not so scary but unexplainable. At my stepmother's funeral, she was played off with the song I'll Fly Away from my personal CD of Oh Brothers soundtrack. On the way home, I got the disc out to play it, and the disc was broken neatly in half, in the case. A really bad car accident near the Pennsylvania-Virginia border on I-81. A car had somehow crossed over the median and hit another car head-on. 3 of the 4 people involved died. Me and my family drove past it before EMS got there, and we saw the dead bodies in 2 cars. It was really graphic. It happened on Easter Sunday of all days. We were driving home after seeing family in Harrisburg. I used to go night running pretty late, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. up a valley near my house. At one point on the road I run on, I go through an area with cemeteries on both sides and an abandoned Japanese Shinto temple nearby. One night during a run, while I was running between the cemeteries, I saw an old Asian lady standing by a bus stop. She said hi, in a very slow and deliberate manner, and waved at me. I nodded and smiled at her and kept jogging. My turnaround point was about 5 minutes past the bus stop, but when I turned around and ran back the way I came, the woman was gone. No cars or buses had driven past me, and I didn't see her walking the road. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but later I realized the whole situation seemed very strange. Why was she there so late at night? Where did she go? I still get a chill up my spine, remembering the odd way she said hi and waved at me. Needless to say, I changed my running route shortly after that. Not sure if this counts, but when I was a kid, my stepdad was drunk and high and thought that one of his friends had both ripped him off and was hitting on my mom behind his back. I don't know how true any of that might actually be, but he grabbed a wooden oar and chased him out of the house and down the street. The thing is, I never saw that guy again, and we lived in a small town. I hope he just left, but I don't know for sure either way. When I was about 7 or 8, I had a rope swing in my backyard. I was obsessed with it and would play on it for hours. One day, just like any other, I was swinging on it, and out of the corner of my eye, I spotted an animal. At first, I thought it was a squirrel, but as I turned to look at it, it was much bigger and darker than a squirrel, so I figured it was a stray cat. But as I watched it walk across the yard, it wasn't a cat. It was something I had never seen before. It was all black. It had the head of a badger, but the body of a squirrel. It was about 2 feet in length and the height of a small dog. I got a little spooked because I figured it was a rabid animal, so I got off the swing and backed away. That's when, in all seriousness, I watched this mystery animal run toward the fence and run right through it, leaving a hole or damage to the fence. It just phased right through. I sat in awe for a good 3 minutes before I slowly walked inside. I might have something for this. When I was young, probably around 10 or so, maybe younger, I was at a family wedding. It was late in the evening, so a full moon was out, and it was getting darker. Me and my cousin, who was a year younger, were swinging on this big metal gate thing outside the venue. It was on the entrance to a very big field. We noticed a guy very far into the field who was just glowing and radiating white. I mean, his skin, clothes, everything. I remember us standing there like, what the Then we tried to get his attention and shouted at him. He stopped looking in our direction, but he stopped right under the full moon and pointed up toward the moon whilst staring at us. We were just in shock and confused, pretty much. After about 10 seconds of pointing, he carried on walking across the field and just disappeared behind a swing set. Even to this day, I have no idea what that was. I'm hoping it was some costume or something, but sure didn't look like it. About 25 years ago, my now former wife and I were caretaking a house. We had been there for several weeks, and we both noticed that we always had the feeling coming up the stairs from the cellar that something was going to grab you as soon as you turned the light switch off. Everything else about the house was normal. We slept with an analog, wind-up alarm clock next to the bed, the kind that actually ticks. To set the alarm, you move a tiny third hand to the location of the clock face for the desired time. For example, halfway between 6 and 7 to awaken at 6:30. It's a physical process, and there's very little way to get it wrong. We always had the clock set to wake us up at 6 a.m. It was not something we fiddled with on a daily basis. One night, the alarm clock went off at like 2 in the morning. Old school ringing bells. Both my former wife and I woke up absolutely terrified. I saw a small figure, maybe 2 feet tall, run out of the room. I thought I must have been crazy, until my former wife screamed, "Did you just see that thing?" We both described it as some sort of small gremlin. When we looked at the alarm clock, we saw that the alarm hand had been moved from 6 a.m. to 2 a.m. That's the whole story. Scared the F out of me. Have no explanation for it. Nothing ever else happened there, but the cellar feeling persisted. Around 2013, one evening, me, my partner, and Labrador were on the beach. When we got there, there were a few other humans and dogs. At one stage, we were around by the rick pools when I saw the Labrador, what was possibly a small animal on the rock. Then the mist started descending. Labrador lady went over to say hello and freaked and ran away. By the time my partner saw it, it had started to grow. Next thing we knew, all the bats started to fly out of this hole in the wall. The Labrador was home before we were. I mean, basement gremlins could be a thing. I mean, they made a couple movies about them. You know, this also made me think for a second, just on a personal note, that I read these stories just about every single day of my life on various topics, and we're grateful that you guys listen to them. But sometimes I go scrolling afterwards to comment on a particular story, and I almost forget I read it, and that was just like 10 minutes ago. I don't know, just thought about that. Anyway, have a great day. Living in a kind of beat-up neighborhood in the early 2000s, my house had an alleyway behind it, and one night around 3 a.m. I heard the weirdest sound, like laughing but also moaning. I looked out my window and saw the elderly man standing under a street lamp, just staring up at the window. It freaked me the F out. He finally kept walking down the alley, but man, I never looked out that window at night again. Was looking out my bedroom window late one summer night at stars. I noticed an oddly colored flashing star that was 100% moving. If you've ever seen a ping pong ball held up suspended by an airflow, that was the type of movement. I'd say bubbling is a good description. This had me weirded out, so I pulled out my phone and started recording. Maybe 10 seconds later, the most terrifying thing I've ever seen happen. An effing beam of white light, cylindrical and bright, not as much as a helicopter spot search, but a high-powered flashlight, appears in my neighbor's backyard, like a literal beam from heaven, maybe 8 feet in diameter, and from the blackness of space as far up as I could see. No source or anything visible. This light is first pointing in the center of their backyard, which is maybe 45 feet from my face. My window is on the side of the house at the rear. Then it starts frantically moving around as if it were searching for something. I felt this in my whole body immediately. I was like, it's looking for me. Stomach on the floor. Then it moves up the side yard toward the front of the house, still on the neighbor's property, but now only 20 feet from where I'm standing. It then diverted onto the side of their house and scanned up the wall to a window, directly across from me 15 to 20 feet. I slammed my window down closed, shut the blackout curtains, and quickly left my room and went to a bathroom in the center of the house with no window visible. This was so effing terrifying and world-changing that I can't express it with words. It 100% happened, and I felt it in my bones and everything. I had this feeling that it was a warning or something, like, don't film or bring attention to me/us. It had to know that it wasn't my window, and was trying to frighten me. If it detected me filming with a phone from a star that's not our sun, positioned in the sky, far as hell, it 100% knew exactly where I was. The neighbor's window wouldn't have even had a vantage point of it due to how it was positioned. I was viewing it 45 degrees over their 2-story house, so the neighbor in that window directly facing my window couldn't physically see it or where it was. That, and the guy feeling I mentioned, are why I feel it was a warning or intentionally scaring the life out of me. It put on a "we're searching for you" show right in front of me, intentionally to dissuade me from giving it focused attention, filming. It worked too, if that's the actual case. I still haven't scanned night skies since then, and that was 2 to 3 years ago, and I used to really look up at night for stuff a lot. Aside from altering my worldview perspective completely, I knew now that something unimaginable to me exists, and it watched me watching it. It made me not afraid of night and the stuff up high, but motivated to not be doing it anymore. A surreal and insane experience. Thinking about it makes me get chills and tear up. Not sadness, but a feeling of overwhelmingness and having a life-altering revelation. I've never told this publicly. I was feeling afraid for a long time, almost 3 years, and only my wife, parents, and a single friend heard this. Seeing this video made me think of it immediately, like I was seeing something being targeted by something impossible or unknown, just like I felt. The event from first appearing to it covering the neon or window and me slamming the window curtains was maybe 7 to 9 seconds. No more than 10 and longer than 5. It's impossible to know exactly, but I'm pretty certain my range is right there. The only other thing it could have been, still equally if not more terrifying, was an altered image of reality being uploaded to my mind. As in, I and only I would have seen this. And if anyone happened to view the area it happened, nothing odd would have been seen by them. I don't know, crazy shit though. I can't believe I'm actually posting it finally. I was coming back from Jersey after dropping my daughter back home in New York City. It was late Sunday night. I got on the subway and the doors closed. About 0.3 minutes later, as I waited for the train to move, a gang of about 150 dudes walked by. They all had on similar outfits, so I figured they were a gang. Each looked at me menacingly as they walked by. A few played like they were fidgeting with the subway door to open it. You bet I was scared crapless. I believe a conductor was sent to protect me that night because the doors closed and the train never moved. I believe a conductor saw me get in and close the doors prematurely. MTA, going my way. I was riding my bike down a rural road when I was about 9 and found a garbage bag filled with red sludge and white sticks. I thought it was blood and bones, but I had a very PG childhood, and I had never ever seen pretend blood and bones, so I had nothing to compare to. I told myself it wasn't what I thought it was. After all, why would there be a ripped open garbage bag filled with blood and bones? 2 days later, I thought, look again. And if it is what you think it is, tell a grown-up. I biked back to the area and it was gone. I'm now old and have watched enough to confirm it was blood and bones. I live in the countryside, and when I was a kid, every day I used to go check the chickens that we had in a hen house in the garden. It was around 8 p.m. in the winter, dark and snow everywhere. I put my shoes on and went outside. Everything went as usual, until I saw it. There was somebody standing in front of me in the dark, or like I wish it was somebody. That figure was almost 3 meters tall and had red glowing eyes. I told my parents, and until this day, nobody believes me. A few years ago, I found out the previous owner of our house committed suicide in the same place our garden years before we moved in. As a kid, there was a camp that had a lean-to it and an old plywood caravan against it a long way out in the Australian bush from the town I grew up in. One school holiday, my friends and I went for a bushwalk and stumbled across it. It didn't look like anyone had been there in months, and we looked in the van, nothing much but moldy seats and a built-in table, usual old caravan stuff. So we shut the door because it smelt moldy. As we sat in the shade of the lean-to, we heard the doorknob squeak and start turning. Pretty sure my backpack is still sitting there 35 years later because I dropped it and ran. We all scattered in different directions and met up lower down the road an hour later. And we were all still pale. No way anyone was in that van. No way. Still bothers me to this day. It wasn't what I saw, but what I heard. I lived down the street from our town cemetery. Me and my buddies would walk around the path in the cemetery. Every now and then I'd see a car in the cemetery when walking, but it was more or less always empty. One day, my 3 friends and I were walking up a small hill in the cemetery, and we all heard a knocking sound, exactly like someone knocking on a door. It was just one loud knock, 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 feet away from us, and then nothing. I looked at my friends, and we all asked if the other made that sound. None of us did and couldn't have. We were in the middle of a road, and the closest tree or grave was 15 to 20 feet away. We looked around at the houses, and no one was outside that could make that noise. It was creepy, and I have no idea how the sound was created. Someone was having a seizure in one of my criminal justice classes in community college. I was sitting in the front of a row in a corner. My best friend is right next to me in front of the other row. The guy that sandwiched my best friend with me at the beginning row on the other side started seizing right after the teacher turned on the lights after showing the class gory crime scene photos. The guy sitting in the back of the guy who started seizing got up out of his seat and moved as if he was going to touch the guy seizing to help him. The professor lady yelled, "Don't you touch him." After he stopped seizing, the professor told the student they had just had a seizure in one of the calmest and gentlest tones. The guy couldn't believe he had had a seizure and asked my best friend if he really had a seizure. My best friend confirmed to him that he did. The teacher dismissed the class with the guy staying behind while the teacher talked to him some more. When I was 9 years old, I was biking home in the evening. We lived in the countryside up a small mountain. The road from the village was an uphill, a flat section, and then another uphill. The road lights only stretched to the end of the flat section. I was a bit afraid of the dark, so I stopped at the end of the road lights just at the bottom of the last uphill to gather courage to bike the last section home. It was a partial moon, so it wasn't pitch black, and at the end of the uphill I saw a figure walking down towards me. I thought I'd wait until he or she got closer, as I would feel less afraid to bike in the dark if there was someone else close. But about halfway down the hill, the person walked into a thin shadow of a tree on the road and never came back out, just disappeared. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what I just saw, and then panicked and biked down the village and stayed there until my parents came driving and wondered why I never came home. They tried to explain it with stuff like the person might have gone into the woods or something. What they didn't disclose, though, out of fear that I'd never dare to bike home again, was that my father had seen the same thing walking home from work. He had seen her clear as day, walking down the hill for a while. When he looked down for just a second and looked up, she was gone, and there were no footsteps in fresh snow. I later read a book about local legends, and apparently a lot of people during at least a century have seen her walking down the hill and disappearing halfway down. My youngest daughter loved this story, so we've been on ghost stakeouts where we buy pizzas and snacks and hang out at the bottom of the hill, listening to the Ghostbusters theme song and try to see that ghost.